Hello everyone! Today's joke of the day is, what does Jack Frost like best about school? Stay tuned to find out. Our learning target for today is, I can solve and graph a compound inequality. So when we're solving inequalities, we have to remember that when we are multiplying or dividing by a negative number, we have to flip the inequality sign. Okay, whenever we are solving an inequality. Now let's look at a few examples where we're going to solve and graph some compound inequalities. So in this one, we'll want to solve both of the inequalities, and then we can graph them as a compound inequality. Okay, so first we will isolate our variable. Okay, in this first one, n plus 1 is less than or equal to negative 3. So we will want to subtract 1. Okay, to get rid of that positive 1, we want to do inverse operations, which is subtracting 1. So we get that n is less than or equal to negative 4. And then for this next one, we want to isolate n by dividing by negative 4 on both sides. And again, when we divide by a negative, we have to make sure that we flip that inequality sign. So we should get n is greater than negative 8 divided by negative 4, which is 2. Okay, so then in this case, we have n is less than or equal to negative 4, or n is greater than 2. So we can graph that on our number line. So if we put some numbers on here, let's do negative 5, 4, negative 3, negative 2, negative 1, 0, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so I'll do this in a different color here. We have n is less than or equal to negative 4, so we put a closed circle at negative 4, and then shade to the left because less than or equal to. And then n is greater than 2. We put an open circle at 2, shade to the right because n is greater, and that is our inequality. Okay, let's look at another example here. Here we have x plus 8 is greater than or equal to 9, so we want to solve this by subtracting, not 9. We want to subtract 8 on both sides here to get x, to isolate that x there. So we have x is greater than or equal to 9 minus 8, which gives us 1. And then we have x divided by 7 is less than or equal to 1. So the inverse of division is going to be multiplying. So we'll multiply by 7 on both sides to get that x is less than or equal to 7. So here we end up with x is greater than or equal to 1, and x is less than or equal to 7. Okay, and we can now graph that on our number line. So I'll put some numbers on here. We'll start here. We'll do 0, 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 maybe. X is greater than or equal to 1. So we have a closed circle at 1 because it's or equal to. And then x is less than or equal to 7. So we'll also have a closed circle at 7. And then we want to shade in between them because it's greater than 1, but also less than or equal to 7. Okay, so that is that inequality here. Okay, now this one has a couple more steps to solve our inequalities. First, we want to add 8 on both sides for this one. We are left with negative 5b because our negative 8 and our positive 8 cancel out. Is less than or equal to negative 60. And then we have negative 5 times b, so we want to do the inverse operation, which is dividing by negative 5. Those will cancel, and we'll end up with b is less than or equal to negative 60 divided by negative 5 is going to be a positive 12. And since we divided by a negative, we actually have to switch our inequality sign there. So it's actually b is greater than or equal to 12 here. Okay, then for the second one, we have 11b minus 12 is less than negative 100. We will want to add 12 to both sides. And those will cancel out, so we'll be left with 11b is less than negative 88. And then we want to divide by 11 on both sides to get that b is less than negative 8. Okay, so here we end up with b is greater than or equal to 12, or b is less than negative 8. Okay, so we'll graph this one on our number line here. We'll maybe go up, start with negative 10, go up by 2's. Okay, there you go. So we have b is greater than or equal to 12, which I will, so that means we have a closed circle at 12, and then greater, so we shade to the right. And then b is less than negative 8, which means we have an open circle at negative 8, and shade to the left because those numbers are less than negative 8. And that is our solution. In this one, we have an x in the middle, okay, and we have numbers on either side there. We have 36 is less than or equal to 11 minus 5x and is less than or equal to 66. Okay, so we know x is going to be in between, or 11 minus 5x is going to be in between 36 and 66. So in this case, we still have to isolate our variable, just like we would usually do. But if we're going to do an inverse operation, we have to do it to each part here, all three sections. Okay, so for example, we'll start by subtracting this 11, and I will subtract 11 from the 36, from the middle part, and from the 66. Okay, so 36 minus 11 will give me 25. We'll keep our inequality symbols the same, so I'll just bring those down. 11 minus 11 cancels out, so we're left with negative 5x in the middle here. Is less than or equal to negative, or 66 minus 11 gives us 55. Okay, and now our final step is going to be to divide by negative 5 on all sides. But because we're dividing by a negative, we need to switch all of our signs. Okay, so we're actually going to flip this sign to be greater than or equal to, and also that one. Okay, and we'll be just left with x in the middle, and we have negative 55 divided by negative 5 gives us negative 11, and 25 divided by negative 5 gives us negative 5. Okay, our x is already written in the middle, so that's good. But the mathematical way that we usually write this is by having the lower number on the left side. So we're just going to kind of switch around the order. We'll have negative 11 over here, which means that we need to flip this inequality sign to be less than or equal to x, and we'll flip that one too to get less than or equal to 5. Okay, so let's just make sure that this makes sense. 11 or negative 11 is less than or equal to x, which is less than or equal to negative 5, and x could be in between those two numbers, so it does make sense and would be greater than negative 11 but less than negative 5. So that's what we're going to do on our number line here. So we'll just fill in some numbers. Okay, and then we'll have a closed circle at negative 11 and a closed circle at negative 5, and then we'll shade in between, and that will be our solution for this inequality. Okay, let's look at another one that has a few steps. So in this case, we have a negative 10. So in order to get rid of a negative 10, we will add 10 on both sides. We'll be left with negative 2v is less than 16. And then finally, we're multiplying here, so we want to divide by negative 2 on both sides. To get that v, as we divide by a negative, so we have to flip our inequality sign. And we have 16 divided by negative 2 gives us negative 8. So v is greater than negative 8. Here we're adding 12, so we want to subtract 12 to get rid of it on both sides, and then we'll get 6v is less than negative 18. We'll divide by 6, so we're multiplying here, that's the inverse. We have b is less than negative 3. And we divided a negative by a positive number, okay? But we divided by a positive number, so we do not need to flip our inequality sign. Okay, so then in this case, we end up with v is greater than negative 8, and v is less than negative 3, and that should work out just fine. Okay, so we'll draw our number line here. Okay, v is greater than negative 8, which means we'll have an open circle at negative 8. V is less than negative 3 means we'll have an open circle at negative 3, and we will just shade in between those. Okay. All right, let's look at one last example here. If we, in this case, we have variables on both sides of our inequalities. Okay, so we'll just have to make sure we are careful of that. I'm going to subtract this 11a from both sides, okay, to move it over till we get rid of it on the right-hand side and we're left with 15. And then we have 4a minus 11a gives us negative 7a and plus 8. Okay, and now we want to isolate the variable because we only have variables on one side of our equation, which is good. So we just want to get that variable all by itself. So we're going to subtract 8 on both sides. We end up with negative 7a is greater than 7. Okay, and our final step here will be to divide by negative 7 on both sides. So we get that a, and we have to flip the sign because we divided by a negative. So a is less than 7 divided by negative 7 gives us negative 1. Okay, so that's the first one. And then over here we have, I'm gonna move my variable to the right hand side this time. So I'm gonna add 14 to both sides, 14a. Okay, because we have a negative 14a. So in order to get 0a, for those to cancel out, we have to add 14a. And then we would end up with 13 is less than or equal to 13 plus negative 3a plus 14a gives us 11a. Okay, and we want to get that 11a by itself, so we'll subtract 13 on both sides. And 13 minus 13 gives us 0, but that's an okay answer to have, right? We can have the number 0. So that will be 0 is less than or equal to 11a. Okay, and then finally, we won't need to get a by itself, so we will divide by 11 on both sides, but 0 divided by 11 is just 0 still, so we have 0 is less than or equal to a. Or I will rewrite that because we always want our variable to be read first, so our variable on the left, that would be a is greater than or equal to 0. Because if we're going to rewrite it in that order, we have to make sure we flip that inequality sign so that it remains the same. Okay, so now in this case, we have a is less than negative 1 and a is greater than or equal to 0. Okay, well, we could try to start graphing this. Okay, if we did that, we would maybe get negative 2, negative 1, 0, 1, 2. Okay, a is less than negative 1. That would mean we have an open circle at negative 1, shade to the left. A is greater than or equal to 0. We'd have a closed circle at 0 and shade to the right. But this is supposed to be an and statement. And in this case, these two graphs do not overlap at all. They don't intersect, which means that in this case, there is actually no solution. It's one of those special cases where we have no solution to our inequality. Okay, now for the joke of the day. What does Jack Frost like best about school? Well, he likes snow and tell. Thanks for watching and have a great rest of your day.